The first time Samuel York saw her mending by the firelight, he thought she looked like something out of a painting his mother used to have back in Philadelphia, all golden glow and concentrated peace in the middle of this hard wilderness. He had been riding for 3 days straight, tracking a herd of stolen cattle that belonged to the ranch where he worked, and his body ached in places he had forgotten existed. The small campfire flickering in the distance had drawn him like a moth to flame, and when he got close enough to see it was a woman alone, every instinct told him to announce himself carefully so as not to frighten her. "Madam," he called out from a respectful distance, his hands visible and away from his gun belt. "I mean no harm, just a weary traveler hoping to share your fire for a spell." She looked up from her work, and even in the dim light he could see the wariness in her eyes. She was younger than he had first thought, maybe 23 or 24, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and a face that spoke of both strength and exhaustion. Her dress was simple calico, faded from many washings, and there was a rifle propped against the log beside her. "You alone?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. "Yes, madam. Been tracking stolen cattle for the better part of a week. Lost the trail about 5 miles back when they crossed the creek. Figured I would make camp and try again at first light." She studied him for a long moment, taking in his worn chaps, the dust covering him head to toe, and the honest fatigue in his face. "You can share the fire," she finally said. "But keep your distance and keep your hands where I can see them." "Yes, madam. Much obliged." Samuel led his horse into the small clearing and began unsaddling the exhausted animal. He worked quietly, efficiently, and when he finally settled himself across the fire from her, he noticed she had returned to her mending. She was darning socks, he realized, her needle moving in and out of the worn wool with practiced precision. The pile beside her suggested she had been at it for some time. "That is quite a stack you have got there," he observed, pulling some jerky from his saddlebag and offering her a piece. She shook her head, declining. "These are for the children at the missionary school in Medicine Bow," she explained, her needle never pausing. "I am heading there myself. Well, I am heading back there. I teach there. Medicine Bow. That is still a good day's ride from here." "I know." Something in her voice suggested a story, but Samuel did not press. Instead, he watched her work in silence, mesmerized by the simple domesticity of it. In all his years drifting from ranch to ranch, from one cattle drive to another, he had forgotten what it looked like when someone took care of the small things that made life bearable. "You are staring," she said without looking up. "Sorry, madam. Did not mean to be rude. It has just been a long time since I saw someone darning socks. My mother used to do that, back before she passed. Used to sit by the fire just like you are doing now." Her needle paused for just a moment. "I am sorry for your loss. It was 10 years ago. I was 19. Seems like a lifetime now." She nodded, understanding in the gesture. "My name is Zara Owens," she offered, a small thaw in her initial wariness. "Samuel York. Folks call me Sam." They fell into a comfortable silence after that, the crackling of the fire and the occasional stamp of his horse the only sounds in the vast Wyoming night. The year was 1882, and this territory was still raw and new, still figuring out what it wanted to be. Medicine Bow was a railroad town, sprung up where the Union Pacific had decided to put a station, and it attracted all sorts of people. Samuel had been through it a few times, enough to know it had a missionary school run by a stern but kind woman named Mrs. Fletcher. "May I ask why you are out here alone?" he ventured after a while. "Seems dangerous for a woman traveling by herself." Zara's jaw tightened slightly. "I had a wagon and a driver. We were bringing supplies back from Rawlins. 3 men ambushed us yesterday morning. They took the wagon, the supplies, the horses, left us alive at least. My driver, Mr. Chen, he was injured. I got him to a homestead about 15 miles back. The family there said they would take him to a doctor, but they could not spare anyone to escort me the rest of the way." "So I am walking." Samuel felt anger rise in his chest. "They just let you walk alone? They have 6 children, and barely enough to feed themselves. I could not ask more of them. Her voice was matter of fact, but he heard the hurt underneath. Besides, I have walked farther. I will make it. He looked at her worn boots, at the determination in the set of her shoulders, and made a decision. Madam, I would be honored to escort you to Medicine Bow tomorrow. Those cattle are probably halfway to Colorado by now anyway. I can pick up their trail another time. She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and he saw her assessing whether he was trustworthy. Why would you do that? Because it is the right thing to do. Because my mother raised me better than to leave a lady to walk alone through country where men steal wagons and hurt drivers. He paused. And because those children need their socks darned, seems to me. A small smile touched her lips, the first he had seen. That is a practical reason, at least. I am a practical man. Are you? She picked up another sock with a hole worn clear through the heel. Most practical men I know do not give up a week's tracking to escort a stranger. Maybe I am redefining practical. She laughed at that, a sound like water over stones, and something in Samuel's chest shifted. He had not expected that, had not expected her laugh to affect him like a physical touch. They talked late into the night, or rather, she talked while she worked, and he listened. She told him about the missionary school, about how she had come west from Ohio 3 years ago after her parents died of fever. She had been 21, alone in the world, and had seen an advertisement seeking teachers willing to work on the frontier. Mrs. Fletcher had taken her in, trained her, and given her a purpose. Now she taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and practical skills to children of railroad workers, ranchers, and the few remaining native families who trusted the school enough to send their children. Do you like it? Samuel asked. The teaching? I love it, she said simply. Those children, they are so hungry to learn. Not just book learning, but everything. How to write their names, how to figure sums, how to read the stories that let them imagine worlds beyond this hard land. She held up the sock she was mending. And practical things too. How to darn socks so they last another winter. Seems like important work. It is the most important work I could imagine doing. There was fierce pride in her voice, and Samuel found himself admiring her more with every word. This was not some fragile flower who needed protecting. This was a woman who had chosen a hard path and walked it with her head high. I cannot do it, though, he admitted, gesturing to her mending. Never learned. After my mother died, I just bought new socks when the old ones wore out. Went through a lot of socks that way. Zara looked at the pile beside her, then at him, and something shifted in her expression. Come here, she said, patting the log beside her. Madam, come here, I will teach you. If you are escorting me to Medicine Bow, the least I can do is teach you a useful skill. Samuel hesitated, then moved around the fire to sit beside her. The proximity made him aware of how long it had been since he had sat this close to a woman, close enough to smell the faint scent of lavender soap and wood smoke that clung to her. She handed him a sock with a hole in the toe and a needle already threaded. First, you stretch the fabric over something round. I use this wooden egg, see? She demonstrated with her own sock. But you can use anything. Some people use a light bulb, though those are harder to come by out here. A wooden egg, that is clever. Necessity is the mother of invention. She guided his hands, showing him how to hold the sock taut. Now, you start at the edge of the hole and weave the thread back and forth, creating a patch. The key is to keep your stitches tight enough to be strong, but loose enough that they do not pucker the fabric. Samuel tried to follow her instructions, but his large, calloused hands felt clumsy with the small needle. He poked himself twice in the first minute and swore under his breath. Here, Zara said, laughter in her voice. She took his hand in hers, guiding the needle with gentle pressure. Like this. See? You are trying too hard. Let the needle do the work. Her hand was warm over his, and Samuel found himself focusing more on the feel of her skin than on the darning. I think I am a lost cause, he said. Nonsense. Everyone can learn. You just need practice. She released his hand and watched as he tried again. This time, he managed a passable stitch, then another. I will be damned, he muttered. I am actually doing it. Language, she chided, but there was no heat in it. And yes, you are. You have good hands. Steady. They worked side by side for another hour, and Samuel found a strange peace in the repetitive motion. The world narrowed to the firelight, the needle, the thread, and the woman beside him. She told him about the children she taught, about young Timothy, who could barely read when he arrived, but now devoured every book she could find for him. About little Sarah, who had the voice of an angel and sang hymns that made grown men cry. About the twins, Jacob and Joseph, who were always getting into trouble, but had hearts of gold. You really love them, Samuel observed. They are my family, Zara said simply. The only family I have now. Something in her voice made Samuel's chest ache. He understood loneliness, had lived with it so long it felt like an old friend, but hearing it in her voice made him want to fix it, to promise her she would never be lonely again. Which was ridiculous because they had just met and he had no right to make such promises. Tell me about you, she said, breaking into his thoughts. What made you become a ranch hand? Samuel considered the question as he worked another stitch. Did not have much choice, really. After my mother died, my father drank himself into an early grave. I was alone at 19 with no trade and no prospects. Went west because everyone said there was work here. Opportunity. Found out pretty quick that opportunity meant hard labor for low pay. But I did not mind. I am good with horses, good with cattle. It is honest work. Do you like it? He had to think about that. I do not know if like is the right word. It is what I know. It is what I am good at. But sometimes, he paused, searching for the right words. Sometimes I wonder if there is more to life than drifting from ranch to ranch, never putting down roots, never having anything that is really mine. What would you want if you could have anything? A place of my own, I suppose. Not a big ranch, nothing fancy, just enough land for some cattle, some horses, a house that does not belong to someone else, maybe a garden, though I do not know the first thing about growing vegetables. He laughed at himself. Listen to me, dreaming like a kid. There is nothing wrong with dreams, Zara said softly. Dreams are what keep us moving forward. They fell silent after that, both lost in their own thoughts as they worked. When Zara finally declared they had mended enough socks for one night, Samuel was surprised to find he was disappointed. His fingers ached from the unfamiliar work, but there was satisfaction in seeing the pile of mended socks, in knowing he had helped create something useful. Thank you, he said as they both stood and stretched. For teaching me, I mean. Thank you for offering to escort me tomorrow. I will sleep easier knowing I am not alone. Samuel returned to his side of the fire and spread out his bedroll, but sleep was long in coming. He lay there staring up at the endless stars, thinking about the woman across from him, about her laugh and her gentle hands, and the way she spoke about her students with such fierce love. He thought about what it might be like to have someone to come home to, someone who would sit by the fire and mend socks and fill the silence with stories. He was being foolish, he told himself. They had just met. She was a school teacher with a calling, and he was a drifter with nothing to offer. But even as he thought it, he knew something had shifted in him tonight. Something had woken up that he thought had died years ago. Across the fire, Zara lay in her own bedroll, equally wakeful. She had not expected this, had not expected to feel safe with a stranger, had not expected to enjoy teaching him something so simple and domestic. She had built walls around her heart after her parents died, had told herself that her students were enough, that she did not need anything more. But sitting beside Samuel, feeling his concentration as he learned to darn, Hearing the loneliness in his voice when he spoke of drifting, she had felt those walls crack just a little. It terrified her. Morning came cold and clear, the Wyoming sky stretching endless and blue above them. Samuel woke first and built up the fire, then made coffee with the grounds from his saddlebag. The smell woke Zara, and she emerged from her bedroll, looking rumpled and more human, less like the composed teacher from the night before. "Good morning," she said, accepting the tin cup of coffee he offered. "Morning. Sleep well?" "Well enough." She did not mention the hours she had spent awake, thinking about him. They broke camp efficiently, and Samuel saddled his horse while Zara gathered her small pack. She had so little with her, he realized. Just a bedroll, a small sack of food, and the bag of socks she had been mending. Everything else had been in the stolen wagon. "We can ride together," Samuel said, gesturing to his horse. "Thunder here is strong enough to carry both of us, and it will be faster than walking." Zara looked uncertain. "Are you sure? I do not want to burden your horse." "Thunder has carried me and a full deer carcass before. You weigh considerably less than that, I promise." She laughed and allowed him to help her up into the saddle. Samuel swung up behind her, and suddenly they were pressed close together, her back against his chest, his arms on either side of her holding the reins. He felt her stiffen slightly, then deliberately relax. "Comfortable?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. "Yes," she said, though her voice sounded a little breathless. They set off at an easy pace, following the wagon road that led to Medicine Bow. The land around them was a study in contrasts, endless sagebrush plains, broken by sudden rocky outcroppings, and distant mountains that still held snow on their peaks even though it was late May. Hawks circled overhead, and once they saw a small herd of antelope bounding away across the scrub. As they rode, they talked. Samuel told her about his mother, about growing up in Philadelphia before his parents had decided to try their luck in the West. They had made it as far as Nebraska before his mother got sick, and then his father had sort of given up on everything, including his son. Zara told him about Ohio, about a childhood that sounded idyllic until the fever came through their town like a scythe. She had nursed both her parents through their final days, had buried them in the churchyard where her grandparents were buried, and then had realized she had no reason to stay. "Do you ever regret coming west?" Samuel asked. Zara was quiet for a moment, thinking. "No," she finally said. "It is hard here, and lonely sometimes, but I am doing something that matters. That is worth more than comfort." "You are braver than you give yourself credit for. Or more stubborn. Maybe both." They stopped at midday to rest the horse and eat a sparse meal of jerky and hardtack. Samuel found himself watching Zara as she sat on a sun-warmed rock, her face tilted up to catch the breeze. She had taken down her hair to repin it, and for a moment it flowed dark and long down her back before she twisted it up again. "What?" she asked, catching him staring. "Nothing. Just thinking." "About?" He should have lied, should have said something innocuous, but instead he found himself being honest. "About how different my life might have been if I had met someone like you 10 years ago." Zara's hands stilled on her hair. "Someone like me? Someone with purpose? Someone who knows what they want and goes after it? Someone who is not afraid of hard work or hard places?" He paused. "Someone who can make darning socks by firelight look like the most peaceful thing in the world." She finished pinning her hair and looked at him directly. "Samuel, you do not know me. We just met last night." "I know, and I am probably speaking out of turn, but I have met a lot of people in my 30 years, and I have learned to recognize quality when I see it. You have it, Zara Owens. In spades." She stood abruptly, her cheeks flushed. "We should keep moving. We still have hours to go before Medicine Bow." Samuel nodded, recognizing he had pushed too far too fast. But as he helped her back onto the horse, as she settled against him once more, he felt her lean back just slightly, allowing more contact than before. It was a small thing, but it gave him hope. The afternoon wore on, and they fell into easier conversation again, the awkward moment passing. Zara asked him about ranching, about cattle drives, about the mechanics of running a spread. Samuel found himself explaining things he had never articulated before about how you could tell when a cow was about to calve, about reading the weather and the behavior of horses, about the delicate balance between giving cattle enough range and keeping them from straying too far. You really do love it, Zara observed, even if you say you do not know if you like it. Maybe I do, Samuel admitted. Maybe I just never let myself think about it that way, because it hurts less if you do not admit to loving something you might lose. That is a sad way to live, says the woman who lost everything and moved 1,000 miles away to start over. That is different. I did not run from love. I just did not have a reason to stay. And do you have a reason to stay now? In Medicine Bow, I mean. Zara considered the question seriously. Yes, she said finally. Those children need me. Mrs. Fletcher needs help. And I have made a good life there, Samuel. I have friends, a place in the community. It might not be Ohio, but it is home now. Something in Samuel's chest both swelled with admiration and ached with disappointment. Of course she had a life, a purpose, a place where she belonged. What had he thought, that she would just give it all up for a drifting cowboy she had known for less than a day? They crested a rise, and there in the distance was Medicine Bow, a collection of wooden buildings huddled around the railroad tracks. It was not much to look at, but Samuel felt Zara sit up straighter, felt the eagerness in her body. Home, she breathed. Tell me about it, Samuel said. The town, I mean. So she did. She told him about the general store, run by Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, about the saloon that was more respectable than most, about the church that doubled as a meeting hall. She told him about Mrs. Fletcher, who had come from Boston 20 years ago as a young missionary wife and had stayed after her husband died of a snake bite, determined to continue his work. She told him about the school, a long building that had once been a bunkhouse for railroad workers, converted with love and limited funds into a place of learning. It does not sound like much, she admitted, but it is everything to those children. For some of them, it is the only place they feel safe, the only place where someone believes they can be more than what they were born into. You really are remarkable, Samuel said softly. This time she did not protest, just reached down and briefly squeezed his hand where it rested on the saddle horn. The gesture, simple as it was, felt more intimate than anything Samuel had experienced in years. They rode into Medicine Bow in the late afternoon, and people immediately began calling out to Zara. A woman came running from the general store, her apron flapping, tears on her face. Zara, oh, thank God. We heard about the ambush, heard that Mr. Chen was hurt. We were so worried. Zara slid down from the horse and was immediately enveloped in a hug. Samuel dismounted more slowly, feeling suddenly like an outsider. This was her world, her people, and he was just a stranger who had happened along at the right time. More people gathered, and Zara was explaining what had happened, introducing Samuel as the man who had escorted her safely home. Hands were shaken, thanks were offered, and Samuel felt himself being swept along to the saloon where someone insisted on buying him a meal and a drink. The next few hours passed in a blur. Samuel ate the best meal he had had in weeks. Real beef stew with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread with butter, and apple pie that made him want to weep. Men asked him about his tracking work, about the cattle he had been following, and he found himself telling the story. Though his attention kept drifting to where Zara sat with a group of women, all of them talking over each other in their relief at having her back. Eventually, Mrs. Fletcher appeared, a tall, ramrod, straight woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She greeted Zara with unusual warmth, then turned that penetrating gaze on Samuel. Mr. York, she said, her voice carrying the crisp consonants of Boston, I understand we owe you a debt of gratitude. No debt, madam, just did what anyone would do. That is patently untrue, but gracious of you to say. She studied him for a long moment. Zara tells me you work as a ranch hand. Are you employed currently? Samuel blinked at the unexpected question. I work for the Bar T Ranch, about 40 miles south of here. Or I did. I may have worn out my welcome by losing that cattle trail. The Bar T. Mrs. Fletcher's mouth tightened. Thomas Brody is a hard man to work for, I understand. He expects a full day's work for a day's pay. Cannot fault him for that. And are you planning to return there? Samuel glanced over at Zara, who was watching their conversation with interest. I had not decided, madam. Why do you ask? Because we need help. The school needs repairs before the winter. The roof leaks, the stove needs replacing, and we have been trying to build an addition for months but cannot afford to hire proper labor. Additionally, some of our older boys need instruction in practical skills, how to care for animals, how to handle tools, how to do the 100 things their fathers cannot or will not teach them. Samuel felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening. You are offering me a job? I am offering you room and board, plus a small wage in exchange for labor and instruction. It would not be glamorous work, Mr. York. Much of it would be manual labor, but you would be helping children who desperately need positive male influence, and you would be earning an honest living. He should have asked about the wage, should have asked about the specifics of the work, but instead, he found himself looking at Zara, at the hope dawning in her eyes, and hearing himself say, "When do I start?" Mrs. Fletcher allowed herself a small smile. Tomorrow morning, there is a room above the stable you can use. It is not much, but it is clean and dry. And just like that, Samuel's life changed direction. The next weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Samuel threw himself into the work with an intensity that surprised him. He repaired the schoolhouse roof, replacing rotten boards and sealing leaks. He tore apart the old stove, cleaned it piece by piece, and got it working more efficiently than it had in years. He started building the addition, framing out 2 new rooms that would serve as a library and a space for the older children to learn trades. But more than the physical work, he found himself drawn into the life of the school. Mrs. Fletcher had not been exaggerating about the boys needing instruction. They came to him with eager faces and endless questions, and Samuel found himself teaching them everything he knew: how to curry a horse properly, how to check a hoof for stones, how to read the sky for coming weather, how to use a saw without cutting off a finger, how to measure twice and cut once. And through it all, there was Zara. She taught in the mornings while Samuel worked on the buildings, but in the afternoons she would bring the younger children outside for lessons, and he would hear her patient voice explaining sums or the names of plants or the rules of grammar. Sometimes she would catch his eye and smile, and Samuel would forget what he was doing, would stand there with a hammer in his hand like a fool until one of the boys said something to snap him out of it. In the evenings, after the children had gone home or to bed, if they were boarders, Samuel and Zara began meeting by the fire in the school's main room. It had started innocently enough. She had been mending again, working through a seemingly endless supply of clothes that needed repair, and he had asked if she would mind if he practiced the darning she had taught him. She had laughed and handed him a sock, and they had fallen into an easy routine. They talked about everything and nothing as they worked. She told him about her day, about the small triumphs and frustrations of teaching. He told her about his projects, about the boys he was training, about the satisfaction of building something that would last. Sometimes Mrs. Fletcher would join them, her own needlework in hand, and they would discuss philosophy or politics or books Samuel had never read but found himself wanting to. "You are good with the boys," Zara said one evening in mid-June. They had been sitting in comfortable silence for a while, just the click of needles and the crackle of the fire breaking the quiet. "They make it easy," Samuel replied. "They actually want to learn. That is more than I can say for myself at that age." "What were you like? At their age, I mean." Samuel had to think back. "Angry mostly." My father was drinking heavily by then, and my mother was so tired all the time from trying to hold everything together. I acted out, got in fights, made trouble. If I had had someone like you or Mrs. Fletcher, someone who actually cared, maybe things would have been different. Zara set down her mending and looked at him directly. You turned out just fine. Samuel York. Did I? I am 30 years old with nothing to my name but a horse and a saddle. I have been drifting for over a decade. You have skills, you have kindness, you have integrity. Those things matter more than property or money, says the woman who had to walk 15 miles alone because she had nothing left after being robbed. Exactly, says the woman who knows what it is like to have nothing and still wake up every day and find reasons to be grateful. She picked up her mending again, her needle stabbing through the fabric with unusual force. Besides, you are not drifting now. You are here. You are building things, teaching things, being part of something. For how long, though? This job is not permanent. Come winter, when the building is done and the boys do not need outdoor instruction, what then? Zara was quiet for a long moment. I suppose that depends on whether you want to stay or whether you want to keep drifting. What if I want to stay? The words came out before Samuel could stop them. What if I want to put down roots here, in this hard-scrabble railroad town, in the middle of nowhere? Then stay, Zara said simply. Medicine Bow could use more good men. And what about you? Samuel set down his own mending, his heart pounding. Could you use a good man, Zara? She looked up at him, her eyes wide in the firelight, and for a moment Samuel thought he had ruined everything. But then she said very softly, I might if he were the right man. And am I the right man? I do not know yet. We have only known each other a few weeks, Samuel. That is not enough time to make decisions about a whole life. My mother used to say she knew she would marry my father 10 minutes after meeting him. That worked out well for them? Samuel winced. Point taken. But Zara, I am not saying we should get married tomorrow. I am just saying that I would like the chance to court you properly, to see if this thing between us, whatever it is, could be something real. Zara set down her mending entirely now, folding her hands in her lap. Samuel watched her face, watched her think it through with the same careful consideration she brought to everything. I need to know something first, she finally said. Are you staying because of the work, or are you staying because of me? It was a fair question, and Samuel gave it the honesty it deserved. Both. I love the work. I love teaching those boys, love building something that matters. I have not felt this useful, this needed in years. But, he paused, making sure she was looking at him. I would be lying if I said you were not a big part of it. Maybe the biggest part. I think about you all the time, Zara. When I am working, when I am teaching, when I am lying in that room above the stable trying to sleep, I think about your laugh and your stubbornness and the way you love those children. I think about sitting with you by the fire, doing something as simple as mending socks and feeling more content than I have ever felt in my life. Tears were shining in Zara's eyes now. Samuel. I am frightened. Of me? Of this? Of caring about someone again. Everyone I have ever loved has left me, one way or another. My parents died. My friends from Ohio, we lost touch. I have built walls around my heart because it is easier than risking that kind of pain again. Samuel moved from his chair to kneel beside her, taking her hand gently. I cannot promise I will never leave you. None of us can promise that. Life is too uncertain out here. But I can promise that if I do leave, it will not be because I wanted to. It will not be because I did not care enough. And I can promise that every day I am here, I will do my best to be worthy of whatever trust you give me. Zara looked down at their joined hands, at his calloused fingers wrapped around hers. I do not know how to do this, she whispered. How to let someone in. We will figure it out together. That is the point of courting, is it not? To figure out if we fit? She laughed through her tears. You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is. Maybe we are the ones making it complicated. She squeezed his hand, and when she looked up at him, there was a softness in her face that had not been there before. All right, all right, all right, you can court me, Samuel York, properly and slowly so we can both be sure. The smile that broke across Samuel's face felt like sunrise. You will not regret this. I better not. I am trusting you with something very precious. Your heart? My peace of mind, she corrected, but she was smiling too. My heart we will talk about later. From that night on, everything felt different. Samuel still worked on the school buildings, still taught the boys, still did all the practical things that filled his days. But now there was courting too. He walked Zara home after their evening mending sessions, even though her room was just down the hall from the classroom. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, great messy handfuls of Indian paintbrush and prairie coneflower that made her laugh. He sat in on her classes sometimes, watching her teach with such patience and creativity, and fell a little more in love with her each time. Because it was love, he realized, not just attraction or loneliness or the novelty of having someone to talk to. Real love, the kind that made him want to be better, to build a life worth sharing, to wake up every morning grateful for another day in her presence. July came hot and dry, and with it came a traveling preacher making his circuit through the small towns. Mrs. Fletcher organized a social for the evening he was in Medicine Bow, and the whole town turned out. There was music and dancing in the street outside the church, and Samuel finally got his chance to hold Zara properly, to dance with her in the twilight while a fiddle player sought out a waltz. You dance well, Zara said, surprised. My mother taught me. She said a gentleman should know how to dance, even if he never gets the chance. Your mother was a wise woman. She would have liked you. Zara looked up at him, her face soft in the fading light. I wish I could have met her. She would have approved of this. Of you. She always wanted me to find someone who would make me want to settle down. Is that what I do? Make you want to settle? You make me want everything I thought I did not deserve, Samuel said honestly. A home, a family, a future. All of it. They stopped dancing, standing still in the middle of the moving crowd, and Zara reached up to touch his face gently. What if I want those things too? Samuel's breath caught. Do you? I am starting to think I might. With you. He kissed her then, right there in front of the whole town, and when she kissed him back, it felt like a promise. Around them, people cheered and whistled, and Mrs. Fletcher smiled her small, satisfied smile. August brought threshing season, and Samuel hired himself out to help the farmers bring in their wheat, earning extra money that he carefully saved. He had a plan forming, had been talking quietly to some of the ranchers about land that might be available, about what it would take to start a small operation of his own. It was a long shot, but for the first time in his life, Samuel had a reason to take long shots. Zara noticed the change in him, the new purpose in his stride. You are scheming something, she accused one evening as they sat on the school's porch, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, just thinking about the future. Care to share those thoughts? Samuel turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I have been saving money. Not a lot, but enough to make a start. There is land available west of here, about 10 miles out. It is not much, just a quarter section, but it has water and decent grass. I am thinking about buying it. Buying land? Samuel, that is wonderful. It would mean building a house, starting a herd. It would be years before I could make it really profitable. But, he paused, suddenly nervous. But if I had help, if I had a partner who believed in the dream as much as I do, maybe it would not take so long. Zara went very still. What are you asking me, Samuel? I am asking if you would consider leaving the school. I am asking if you would consider building a life with me on land of our own. I am asking, he took a deep breath. I am asking if you would consider marrying me, Zara Owens. She did not answer right away, and Samuel's heart sank. He had moved too fast, had assumed too much. But then he saw that she was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. I never thought I would have this, she whispered. After my parents died, after I came west alone, I thought that part of life was over for me. I thought I would spend my days teaching other people's children and never have my own. I thought I would grow old alone. You do not have to, not if you do not want to. But the school, the children, Mrs. Fletcher, they need me. I know. And I am not asking you to abandon them. We could find someone to replace you. Or maybe you could still teach part-time if the commute is not too far. Or, he hesitated, or I could sell the land and stay here, keep working for the school. I just thought, I hoped, that maybe we could build something that was ours. Zara wiped her eyes and looked at him with such love that Samuel felt his chest tighten. Yes, 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 I will marry you. Yes, I want to build a life with you. Yes to the land and the house and the dream of something that is ours. She laughed shakily. I must be crazy. We have known each other less than 3 months. My mother's 10-minute rule. Your mother was clearly an optimist. She raised me, did she not? That proves it. Zara kissed him then, long and sweet, and when they finally broke apart, Mrs. Fletcher was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed and a knowing look on her face. I assume congratulations are in order, she said dryly. We are getting married, Zara announced, her face glowing. Obviously, I have been waiting for this boy to work up the courage for weeks now. Mrs. Fletcher came out onto the porch and surprised them both by hugging Samuel. You are a good man, Samuel York. You will take care of her. With my life, madam. See that you do, and Zara, you are not abandoning the school. We will work something out. Maybe those children could use a place to visit on weekends, somewhere outside of town where they could see what ranching life is really like. Think about that. It was so typical of Mrs. Fletcher to be already planning, already figuring out how to make the change work for everyone. Samuel felt a rush of gratitude for this stern, kind woman who had given him a chance when he was just a stranger on a horse. They married in September, in the little church with the whole town in attendance. Zara wore a dress that the women of Medicine Bow had helped her make, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Samuel wore his best shirt and new trousers, his boots polished until they shone. The traveling preacher had timed his circuit to be there for the ceremony, and he spoke about faith and commitment and building lives on solid foundations. When Samuel slipped the ring on Zara's finger, a simple gold band he had bought with his summer wages, his hand shook slightly. But when she looked up at him and smiled, all the nervousness fled. This was right. This was what he had been searching for all those years of drifting. I love you, he whispered as the preacher pronounced them man and wife. I love you too, she whispered back. Forever. Their first home was a small cabin Samuel built on their new land, one room with a loft and a fireplace he crafted from river stones. It was crude compared to the houses in town, but Zara decorated it with wild flowers and curtains she sewed from feed sacks, and to Samuel it was a palace. They spent the fall preparing for winter, laying in supplies, building a small barn for the 3 cows and handful of chickens they had acquired. Samuel cut wood until his back ached, determined they would be warm come the Wyoming winter. And in the evenings they would sit by the fire, and Zara would mend while Samuel practiced the darning she had taught him that first night. It became their ritual, their quiet time together after the work of the day was done. They would talk about their plans, about the cattle they would buy in the spring, about the garden Zara wanted to plant, about the children from the school who came to visit on Sundays and learned about ranch life. Winter came hard and early, snow piling up around their little cabin until some days they could barely get to the barn to feed the animals. But they had plenty of food, plenty of wood, and most importantly, they had each other. Samuel had never been so grateful for the walls of a house, for the warmth of a fire, for the presence of another human being who chose to be there with him. One night in late January, they were sitting by the fire as usual when Zara set down her mending and placed a hand on her stomach. Samuel looked up, concerned. "Are you all right?" "More than all right," she said, her eyes shining. "Samuel, I am with child." For a moment he could not breathe. Then he was across the room, kneeling beside her chair, his hand covering hers. "Truly?" "Truly. By summer we will be 3." Samuel rested his head in her lap and felt her fingers run through his hair, and he wept. For joy, for gratitude, for the sheer impossibility of how much his life had changed since that night he had seen a woman mending socks by firelight. Spring came eventually, as it always did, and with it came new calves and garden planting, and the return of the circuit preacher who performed baptisms. Summer brought their son, born on a hot July day, with Mrs. Fletcher in attendance to help with the delivery. They named him Thomas after Samuel's father, a way of honoring the man his father might have been without the drink. "He has your eyes," Zara said, exhausted but radiant as she held the baby. "And your stubbornness, if that cry is any indication," Samuel replied, running a gentle finger over his son's tiny fist. The years rolled by, marked by seasons and growth. They added rooms to the cabin as they needed them, until it was a proper ranch house. They increased their herd slowly but steadily, earning a reputation for quality cattle and honest dealing. Samuel taught young Thomas everything he knew, and when their daughter Emma came along 2 years later, he taught her too, despite raised eyebrows from some in town. "A girl does not need to know about cattle," Mr. Patterson from the general store said one day. "My girl does," Samuel replied firmly. "She needs to know she can do anything her brother can do, and probably do it better." Zara, overhearing, had kissed him right there in the store, scandalizing the more conservative customers and delighting their friends. They took in students from the missionary school on weekends, just as Mrs. Fletcher had suggested, and their ranch became an extension of the school's mission. Children learned practical skills, yes, but more than that, they learned that hard work and determination could create something from nothing. They learned that families could be built, not just born into. They learned that love was as much about sitting by a fire darning socks as it was about grand gestures and declarations. On their 10th anniversary, Samuel surprised Zara by producing a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a wooden egg for darning and a set of beautiful needles. "I thought the old ones were getting worn," he explained, suddenly shy. Zara held the darning egg, running her fingers over the smooth wood. It had been carved with intricate designs, flowers and vines, and at the very bottom, their initials intertwined. "You made this." "Took me all winter, working on it when you were asleep or busy with the children. Wanted it to be perfect." She kissed him then deeply and whispered against his lips, "It is perfect. You are perfect." "I am far from perfect. You are perfect for me. You always have been from that first night when you sat down beside me and wanted to learn." That night, after the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet under a blanket of stars, they sat by the fire as they had done thousands of times before. Zara used her new darning egg to mend one of Thomas's socks, while Samuel worked on patching Emma's favorite dress. The radio, a modern convenience they had finally acquired, played softly in the background. "Do you ever think about that night?" Zara asked. "The night we met? All the time. I think about how close I came to riding past your fire, to not stopping. I think about how different my life would be if I had been too proud or too cautious to sit down and learn something new. I think about how frightened I was," Zara admitted. "Not just of you, but of being alone, of having to walk to Medicine Bow by myself. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I had not even said yet." Do you ever regret it? Leaving the school? Coming out here to the middle of nowhere? Zara set down her mending and looked at him with such certainty that Samuel felt it in his bones. Never, not for one single moment. This is exactly where I am supposed to be. They grew old together on that ranch, watching their children grow and eventually bring home partners of their own. Thomas married a sweet girl from town and started his own spread just over the ridge. Emma, headstrong and determined, became a teacher like her mother, but also helped run the ranch, proving that a woman could do both. More grandchildren came, filling the house with noise and laughter, and Samuel and Zara watched it all with grateful hearts. When Mrs. Fletcher died at the age of 87, the whole town mourned, but none more than Samuel and Zara. She had been the one to bring them together in a way, and they made sure the missionary school continued in her honor, endowing it with enough money to hire another teacher and keep the doors open for another generation. On Samuel's 70th birthday, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. There was food and music and stories told about the old days, about how Grandpa Sam had been a drifter until he found Grandma Zara mending socks by firelight. The grandchildren, who had heard the story 100 times, still begged to hear it again. Tell us about the darning lesson, little Samuel, named after his grandfather, demanded. So Samuel told them, with Zara interjecting corrections and additions, about that night when a weary cowboy had stumbled upon a brave school teacher and learned that sometimes the most important skill you can acquire is the ability to sit still beside someone and learn. He told them about sitting by the fire, about clumsy fingers learning to weave thread, about conversation that revealed hearts. And then you fell in love? Asked Emma's youngest, a girl named Hope. Then we fell in love, Zara confirmed, reaching over to take Samuel's hand. Even after all these years, the touch still sent warmth through him. But it was not just that night. It was all the nights after, all the mornings waking up beside each other, all the hard times we worked through together. Love is not just one moment. It is choosing each other over and over every single day. That is not very romantic, Grandma, Hope complained. It is the most romantic thing in the world, Samuel corrected gently, because it is real. Fairy tales are fine, but they do not tell you what comes after the happy ending. We got to live the after, and it was better than any story. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Samuel and Zara sat on their porch and watched their family. Children chased each other through the yard. Their adult children talked and laughed. Babies slept in willing arms. It was everything Samuel had dreamed of that night 30 years ago when he had told Zara about wanting land of his own and a house that did not belong to someone else. We did all right, did we not? He said softly. We did better than all right, Zara replied. We built something real, something that will last long after we are gone. Because of you, because you took a chance on a drifting cowboy. Because you sat down beside me and wanted to learn, she corrected. That is what made the difference, Samuel. You were not afraid to be taught, not afraid to be vulnerable, not afraid to try something new. That is a rare quality in a man. I had a good teacher. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Inside the house, someone started playing the piano, an old hymn that Zara had taught the children years ago. Voices joined in, harmonizing, filling the night with music. I am glad you stopped at my fire that night, Zara said. Best decision I ever made. Even though you lost the cattle trail? Samuel laughed. Especially because I lost the cattle trail. If I had found those cows, I would have taken them back to the bar tea and gone back to drifting. I would have missed all of this. You think it was fate? I think it was a combination of luck, timing, and a woman brave enough to let a stranger share her fire. He turned to look at her, at the silver in her hair and the lines around her eyes, at the face he had been looking at for 30 years and still found more beautiful than any other. I think it was you. Zara leaned her head on his shoulder, and they rocked gently, the old porch swing creaking with each movement. Through the window, they could see their family, their legacy, the proof that love and hard work and determination could create something lasting, even in the harsh Wyoming wilderness. Teach me something, Samuel said suddenly. Zara lifted her head. What? Teach me something new, like you did that first night. Samuel York, you are 70 years old. What could I possibly teach you that you do not already know? I do not know anything, everything. I just want to sit beside you and learn. Zara smiled, that same smile that had first captured his heart, and stood up. Come inside. I will teach you how to make Emma's favorite cookies. You are always saying you cannot bake. I cannot. Then it is time you learned. So they went inside, leaving the porch swing rocking gently behind them, and joined their family. And in the warm kitchen that smelled of coffee and vanilla, surrounded by the people they loved, Samuel learned to measure flour and cream butter while Zara guided his hands and their grandchildren watched with fascination. It was not so different from that night by the fire, really. It was still about being willing to learn, willing to try, willing to sit beside someone and be taught. It was still about love expressed in small, practical moments. It was still about building something together, one stitch, one moment, one lesson at a time. And when the cookies came out of the oven, golden and perfect, Samuel pulled Zara close and kissed her in front of everyone, not caring that their children groaned and their grandchildren giggled. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. For what? For stopping darning socks long enough to teach a foolish cowboy how to mend things, for taking a chance on me, for building this life with me, for everything. It was my pleasure, Zara said simply. It has always been my pleasure. The years continued to pass, as years do, and eventually Samuel and Zara slowed down, handing over more and more of the ranch operations to Thomas and Emma. But they never stopped sitting by the fire in the evenings, never stopped mending and talking and simply being together. It was their ritual, their touchstone, the thing that had defined their relationship from the very beginning. When Samuel died at the age of 78, it was peacefully in his sleep, with Zara beside him, as she had been for nearly 40 years. The whole town turned out for his funeral, and person after person stood up to talk about what Samuel York had meant to them. The boys he had taught, now men with children of their own, the ranchers he had helped in hard times, the family he had built, and the legacy he left. But it was Zara who had the final word, standing at the front of the church with dry eyes and a steady voice. My husband was not a complicated man, she said. He believed in hard work, honest dealing, and treating people with respect. He believed in building things that would last. But most of all, he believed in being willing to learn. On the night we met, he sat down beside me and asked me to teach him how to darn socks. It was such a small thing, such a simple request, but it told me everything I needed to know about who he was. He was not too proud to admit he did not know something. He was not too stubborn to let someone else be the teacher. He was willing to sit still, to focus, to try something new. That quality, that openness, that humility, it shaped our entire marriage. We learned from each other every day, taught each other, grew together. And that is what I will miss most. Not the grand gestures or the big moments, but the small ones. The quiet evenings by the fire, the patient lessons, the willingness to always keep learning. She paused, looking out at the crowded church, at her children and grandchildren in the front row, at the community that had become her family. Samuel used to say that stopping at my campfire was the best decision he ever made. But I think we both know the truth. The best decision was what came after. It was choosing to sit down and learn. It was choosing to stay. It was choosing each other every single day for 40 years. That was the real miracle. Not the meeting, but the staying. Zara lived another 12 years, staying on the ranch with Emma and her family, teaching her great-grandchildren to read and to mend and to appreciate the small, practical acts of love that make a life. She kept Samuel's darning egg on her bedside table, and sometimes, when she could not sleep, she would hold it and remember that night by the fire, when everything changed. When she finally passed, also peacefully, also in sleep, they buried her beside Samuel on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone was simple, just their names and the years of their lives, but underneath, Emma had insisted on adding one line. They sat beside each other and learned. The ranch continued, passed down through generations, and the story of how it began, how Samuel York had stopped at a campfire and learned to darn socks from a brave schoolteacher named Zara Owens, became family legend. Great-great-grandchildren who never knew them still heard the story, still understood that love was built on small moments, on willingness to learn, on choosing to sit beside someone and try. The missionary school, endowed by Samuel and Zara, continued its work, and every year on the anniversary of Mrs. Fletcher's death, there was a special ceremony where students learned traditional skills, including darning, in honor of the school's founders and the couple who had supported it for so long. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the Wyoming plains, you could almost see them, an old couple sitting by firelight, heads bent over their mending, learning from each other still, loving each other still, together in the way that only 40 years of choosing each other every single day could create. The story of Samuel and Zara became more than just family legend. It became a reminder that the best love stories are not about love at first sight or grand romantic gestures. They are about a cowboy willing to learn how to darn socks, about a school teacher willing to trust a stranger, about two people who found each other in the wilderness and built something that lasted long after they were gone. They are about sitting beside someone and learning, always learning, forever learning, together.